Welcome to Sleepy Tales, where relaxing stories are told slowly and softly to help you gently fall asleep. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. For more peaceful tales, subscribe and hit the bell to stay updated. Now, get comfortable and drift off to tonight's bedtime story. In every corner of the world, people long for a place where they truly belong. And Thumbelina's journey is one of the smallest and yet most powerful reminders of this simple wish. Born from a flower and no taller than a thumb, she drifts through dangerous waters, cold nights underground, and strange lands that seem far too big for her fragile frame. Yet her path is also filled with unexpected moments of beauty, light in dark places, kindness from unlikely creatures, and the quiet strength that grows inside someone who keeps searching for a home they have never known. This retelling follows her gentle but perilous journey, told in simple language and steady pacing, unfolding piece by piece until her place in the world finally becomes clear. There once lived a woman who longed for a child with all her heart. Her home was quiet, her days were simple, and she carried a gentle wish inside her that never seemed to fade. She cared for her small garden as if every leaf might one day answer her longing. When she planted the seed that would change her life, she did so with the soft hope that the world might finally hear her wish. From that seed grew a single flower, beautiful and bright, with petals that wrapped around something hidden deep inside. When the flower finally opened, it revealed a tiny girl, no taller than a thumb. The woman felt her heart fill in a way it never had before, for she knew that this tiny child was meant for her. The little girl came into the world as delicate as a petal. Her limbs were thin and graceful, her movements light and careful, and her face so small that the woman would look at her for long moments just to understand how something so tiny could appear so perfect. The woman named her Thumbelina, for there was no other name that seemed to fit her small size. Thumbelina's first days were spent exploring the soft petals of the flower she had emerged from. The woman made her a small bed from a walnut shell and lined it with petals, so Thumbelina would always feel wrapped in the gentle comfort of nature. Thumbelina slept peacefully there, and when she woke, she would wander across the table or sit by the window, watching the world beyond the glass. To the woman, Thumbelina was a blessing. With every small movement, with every smile she shared, the house felt lighter and brighter. Thumbelina would sit upon the woman's palm, her tiny form warm against the skin, and the woman would carry her gently from room to room. Thumbelina loved to listen to the soft rustle of leaves outside the window. She enjoyed watching the sunlight dance through the curtains, leaving patterns on the floor. She found beauty in the simplest moments, and the woman treasured every one of them. For a time, the house was filled only with peace and wonder. Yet even in this peaceful house, the world outside continued moving in its own way. Days passed and seasons shifted. Thumbelina began to understand more of her surroundings. She learned how to climb the stem of a flower placed in a vase. She learned how to move through blades of grass in the garden, each one towering above her like a tall green tree. She discovered the warm comfort of sunlight on her face and the refreshing touch of morning dew on her hands. everything seemed new and endless, and Thumbelina embraced each discovery with a quiet curiosity. The woman watched her closely, knowing how fragile and small she was. She tried to keep Thumbelina safe from anything that might harm her. Birds flew overhead, insects wandered through the garden, and sudden gusts of wind swept across the grass. To Thumbelina, these things seemed large and powerful, and though she did not fear them at first, she began to sense that the world held dangers she could not fully understand. Even the gentle ripples in the garden pond appeared wide enough to pull her under. The woman would lift her away from the water, holding Thumbelina close whenever the wind grew too strong. Thumbelina felt protected, but she also felt curious about the world that stretched far beyond her reach. In time, the woman made Thumbelina a small boat from a polished leaf, tying a thin strand of hair to it so she could pull the little boat across a bowl of water Thumbelina loved, drifting on the still surface, watching her reflection shift and sway. She felt calm as she floated, as if she were part of something larger and more beautiful. She did not know that water, which felt so gentle now, could become one of the greatest dangers she would ever face. For the moment, the leaf boat was simply a toy that brought her joy. During warm nights, the woman would place a flower petal blanket over Thumbelina as she slept in her walnut shell bed. Moonlight would filter through the window, falling across Thumbelina's peaceful face. The woman often stayed awake longer than she needed to, just to make sure Thumbelina rested safely. The world outside their home was full of large creatures and sudden movements, and the woman feared that something could take her tiny child away. Thumbelina, unaware of the depth of this fear, continued to live each day with the purity and innocence of someone who had not yet seen the darker parts of life. But those darker parts existed, and they watched from outside the warm walls of the woman's home. In the garden, creatures stirred during the night. Some were harmless, but others were curious and drawn to anything unusual. As Thumbelina grew more comfortable moving around on her own, she spent more time outside among the flowers. She would sit on a leaf, listening to the faint humming of insects or the gentle swaying of stems in the breeze. The garden was beautiful, but it was not meant for someone as small as she was to explore without caution. One evening, as the sky shifted from gold to deep blue, the woman carried Thumbelina to her bed as always. She placed the walnut shell near her own pillow and kissed the air above Thumbelina's head. Before blowing out the candle, Thumbelina curled into the soft petals and drifted into sleep. But the house grew quiet, and the stillness of the night invited creatures who did not belong there. Through an open window, a pair of small eyes watched Thumbelina's sleeping form. The creature moved silently, drawn to her size and beauty. It slipped inside when the moonlight was at its softest, creeping closer to the small walnut shell. Thumbelina did not stir. Her breathing remained slow and steady as the creature examined her. To the intruder, Thumbelina seemed like a treasure. Her delicate form made her appear helpless and easy to take. The creature, with a quick and practiced movement, lifted the walnut shell and carried it across the room. By the time the woman woke the next morning, Thumbelina was gone from her bedside. The empty space struck her with a fear she had never known. Thumbelina was carried far from the warmth of the home she loved. The night air felt cold against her cheeks, she remained asleep, unaware of the journey she had already begun. When morning light finally touched her eyelids, she would awaken to a world she had never imagined, a world where she would have to rely on her courage more than ever. Her life, once gentle and sheltered, now drifted toward uncertainty. And so, her journey began, not by her own choice, but by the forces of a world that did not understand how fragile she truly was. The leaf boat she once played with had shown her how large the world of water could be. But soon, she would learn what it truly meant to be carried away by it. Her days of safety inside the woman's home had ended, but her story was only beginning, moving forward into a wider and more unpredictable world that waited beyond the first break of dawn. When Thumbelina finally opened her eyes after being taken from her warm home, she felt the cold touch of morning air brush across her skin. She did not wake in her walnut shell bed. Instead, she found herself lying on a broad green leaf that rocked softly beneath her. The gentle movement made it clear that she was floating, carried by water she did not choose to drift upon. For a moment, Thumbelina remained still, overwhelmed by the unfamiliar scene around her. Above her stretched the open sky, wider and brighter than she had ever seen before. And around her, the water shimmered with reflections of trees bending over the stream. The leaf moved slowly but steadily, guided by the stream's current. Thumbelina sat up carefully, holding onto the thick central vein of the leaf to keep her balance. The world seemed massive compared to her tiny form. Tall reeds swayed on either side, rising like pillars that reached toward the sky. She could hear the distant calling of birds, the splashing of small fish beneath the surface, and the quiet whisper of the wind. The stream was calm at this moment, but its depth and width made her feel small in a way she had never felt before. As her leaf drifted forward, she watched insects skimming across the surface with ease. Their movements were light and effortless. To them, the water felt like a playground, but to Thumbelina, it was a world that could swallow her whole. She held tightly to the leaf as she tried to understand what had happened to her. She remembered falling asleep in her home, safe in her walnut shell, and now she was out in the open with no idea of how far she had been taken. Her tiny heart beat quickly, but she reminded herself that fear would not guide her anywhere. She needed to observe, to learn, and to find a way to survive. The sun rose higher, warming her chilled skin. Thumbelina let the warmth settle into her, grateful for even the smallest comfort. As the hours passed, she noticed the natural path of the stream changing. The water formed tiny ripples, bumping her leaf gently. Sometimes the current pushed her faster, and the stones beneath the surface created bursts of bubbling water that lifted her slightly before letting her settle again. Thumbelina felt each movement, each shift, and she adjusted her body with care to keep from tipping over. Her instincts grew sharper with every minute she spent on the leaf, teaching her how to stay balanced and how to anticipate the water's behavior. At times, she saw creatures who seemed curious about her. A small fish swam close, its large, round eyes studying her shape as if she were a new kind of insect or plant. Thumbelina stayed still, not wanting to attract unwanted attention. The fish flicked its tail and disappeared into deeper water. Later, a dragonfly hovered above her, its delicate wings catching the light. Thumbelina admired its beauty, feeling a strange comfort in seeing something so graceful in a world that felt unfamiliar. But she knew that beauty did not mean safety. Even small creatures could become threats simply because of her size. As the stream carried her onward, Thumbelina learned to read the signs of the water. She noticed that quieter areas formed where the current slowed, and that reeds softened the movement of the stream when they grew thick on one side. She also noticed that the water grew rougher where the banks narrowed. She learned when to crouch low on the leaf to stay steady, and when to sit upright to watch the path ahead. Each moment strengthened her sense of herself. She was no longer the small girl sheltered in a warm house. She was now someone who had to move with the world, not against it. Throughout the day, she saw many things she had never seen before. She drifted under branches heavy with leaves. She passed clusters of tiny white flowers floating near the shore. She saw frogs sitting on stones, their bodies still and their eyes half closed. She saw snails clinging to the tall stems of plants, slowly inching their way upward. Everything around her seemed to be living its own quiet life. Thumbelina felt as though she had slipped into a place filled with secrets that existed only for those small enough to notice them. The hours stretched on, and the water eventually carried her toward a wider pond, where the stream opened. Here the air felt cooler, and the light reflected more brightly on the surface. Lily pads floated around her, their leaves large and round, like soft platforms that seemed much sturdier than the leaf she rode upon. Thumbelina drifted past them, her eyes filled with wonder at how calm the pond appeared. Yet beneath the stillness, life continued to move. Small fish darted beneath the pads. Water beetles ran across the surface. Even the shadows of larger creatures passed beneath her leaf now and then, reminding her that danger could come from anywhere. She continued drifting without knowing where the water would take her next. The pond carried her slowly, sometimes turning her leaf in gentle circles. Thumbelina used this time to rest, lowering herself onto the warm surface and breathing in the fresh scent of water and plants. Though she was far from safe, she knew resting would help her stay strong for whatever came next. As the sun began to lower in the sky, the air around the pond shifted. The warmth of the day faded, replaced by a cool breeze that rustled through the reeds. Thumbelina wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay warm. The leaf rocked beneath her as the air grew colder. She could feel a quiet warning in the change of temperature. The world around her was shifting again, moving towards something she could not yet see. Nightfall approached slowly, and the pond darkened. Small ripples formed as insects landed on the water. Birds called from somewhere far away as they prepared to settle in for the night. Thumbelina felt vulnerable in the growing darkness. The leaf beneath her no longer felt as steady. She knew she needed shelter, a place where she could rest without fear of the night's dangers. The breeze strengthened, pushing her leaf toward the edge of the pond, where thick grasses grew. The blades towered above her, like tall green walls. Thumbelina reached out, grabbing hold of one of the stalks as she drifted close. The leaf tilted slightly, but did not overturn. She used what little strength she had to pull herself towards the base of the grass, until her leaf caught between several stems. The water still moved beneath her, but now she was held in place, protected from drifting further into the cold and open pond. The air grew colder still, and the night deepened. Thumbelina remained on her leaf, sheltered between the tall grasses, listening to the soft sounds of the pond as the world settled into darkness. She knew she could not stay on the water forever. The night air carried a warning that the seasons were beginning to change, and she would soon need a warmer place if she wished to survive. The cold pressed against her skin, and Thumbelina closed her eyes, knowing that when morning came, she would need to look for shelter beyond the water's edge. Her journey on the stream had taught her much, but it also made her understand how fragile her tiny life was. As she drifted into an uneasy sleep, Thumbelina sensed that her path would soon lead her somewhere new, somewhere hidden beneath the earth, where the cold winds could not reach her. When Thumbelina woke the next morning, the cold was sharper than before. It slipped through the tall grasses and touched her skin with a chill that made her shiver. The sun had risen, but its warmth no longer reached the edges of the pond the way it once had. Thumbelina looked around from her resting place between the grasses and knew she could not stay on the water any longer. The season was changing, and the gentle world of summer had already begun to fade. She stepped carefully onto the bank, her tiny feet sinking slightly into the damp soil. Each blade of grass rose above her like a towering wall, and every fallen leaf seemed larger than her entire body. As she moved forward, the wind brushed past her again, reminding her that she needed shelter before night returned. The chill made her breath feel thin and fragile, and she knew the coming days would only grow colder. Thumbelina wandered along the ground, pushing past fallen petals and stepping over small stones that felt like heavy obstacles. She searched for anything that might protect her from the cold. The world around her felt both quiet and tense, as if all living things were preparing for something heavy and long. The leaves on the trees above had begun to turn pale and drift downward. The earth smelled damp, and the gentle songs of insects had grown faint. As she walked, Thumbelina noticed an opening in the ground, small to the eyes of the world, but large enough for her to enter. A soft warmth drifted from it, mixed with the earthy scent of underground soil. Without knowing what waited inside, she understood that warmth meant safety, at least for the moment. She stepped toward the hole and peered inside. Dimness filled the tunnel, but it looked soft, sheltered, and free from the biting wind outside. Carefully, she climbed down into the passage. The deeper she went, the warmer it became. The walls of the tunnel were smooth from many small feet, moving through them over time. Thumbelina followed the slope, placing her hands on the ground to steady herself. Soon the dim tunnel opened into a small underground chamber. Soft grasses lined the floor, woven together to make it comfortable. The quiet steadiness of the place made her feel as though she had stepped into a hidden world untouched by the cold above. Here she was, discovered by the creature who called this place home, a field mouse who lived alone beneath the earth. Thumbelina, cold and tired, looked fragile enough to need immediate care, and the mouse offered her warmth and shelter. The underground chamber became her refuge. Thumbelina soon found herself wrapped in soft materials gathered by the mouse, resting near a small storage of grains and roots that would last through the winter. Life beneath the earth moved slowly. Thumbelina adjusted to the dimness, learning to recognize the outlines of objects by the soft light that filtered in through distant cracks in the soil. The days passed without the bright colors of the outdoors. Instead, she lived in a world of muted browns and soft shadows, where time was marked not by sunlight, but by the quiet routines of surviving the cold season. Thumbelina was grateful for the warmth. The field mouse made sure she had food and a place to sleep. And she felt a gentle peace, knowing she would not freeze as the air above grew colder each day. But the stillness also made her aware of how small her world had become. She had once floated across an open pond, surrounded by sky and moving water. Now she lived beneath the earth, unable to see the sun or feel the wind. Each day began and ended in the same quiet glow. As weeks passed, Thumbelina learned that the underground world was not only a shelter, but also a place of careful preparation. Winter approached quickly, and the field mouse spent much time gathering and organizing food stores. Thumbelina helped, carrying small crumbs and tiny seeds, doing what she could with her tiny hands. Though the work was repetitive, she felt some comfort in contributing to the little home that kept her safe. Yet not everything underground brought comfort. The field mouse believed strongly in planning for the future and in caring for those who appeared vulnerable. Because Thumbelina was so small and alone, the mouse believed she needed more than temporary shelter. The mouse began to speak often about another resident of the underground world, a mole who lived deeper within the soil and who had a desire for companionship. Thumbelina learned of the mole's large tunnels and his wealth of stored roots and grains. The mouse believed that Thumbelina would be happiest living with him, protected forever from the dangers of the surface. But as Thumbelina listened, her heart tightened. She imagined living forever in dim underground passages, never seeing the sunlight again, never feeling the soft breeze or the warmth of open air. She remembered drifting across the stream, frightened but free. She remembered the comfort of the woman's home and the beauty of the garden. Though she appreciated the safety of the underground chamber, she had never wished to stay here forever. The thought of remaining in the darkness filled her with a quiet dread. Still, she felt trapped between gratitude and fear. The field mouse had saved her life, offering warmth when she had none. Thumbelina did not want to seem ungrateful or unkind. She understood that the mouse meant well, believing she was providing Thumbelina with a safe future. But kindness did not erase Thumbelina's longing for light, color, and space. She could not imagine spending the rest of her days hidden beneath the earth, far from the sky. As the cold above grew stronger, the mole visited more often. He moved slowly through the tunnels, bringing gifts of withered roots and speaking proudly of the safe, dark life he believed Thumbelina should share with him. Each visit made Thumbelina feel more tightly held within a future she did not want. The walls of the tunnels seemed to press in around her as the days passed. The warm chamber that had once felt comforting now felt like a room without doors. The field mouse continued to encourage the idea, repeating that Thumbelina was too small and delicate to live above the earth. Thumbelina listened silently, her heart sinking deeper each time. She did not know how to express the quiet fear growing inside her. She did not want to stay in the darkness, but she also did not know how to escape the tightening hold of those who believed they were helping her. One day, the mole invited Thumbelina to walk through one of his long tunnels, saying it would soon become her home as well. Thumbelina followed, though her steps felt heavy. The tunnel seemed endless, filled with cool air and the stillness of deep soil. She imagined what it would feel like to live in such a place forever, never to see the sun again. The thought made her chest ache. As they walked, they passed the body of a small bird that had fallen into the tunnel. It lay still, as if frozen by the cold winds before it tumbled underground. Thumbelina paused beside it. The sight of the bird filled her with sadness. Once, it had flown beneath the bright sky, free to move wherever it wished. Now it lay silent in the darkness, unable to return to the world it loved. In that moment, something awakened inside her. She understood the depth of what she would lose if she stayed underground. She felt the weight of the soil, the narrowness of the tunnels, and the fading of all the colors she once knew. She could not let this become her life. And so, deep within that dim tunnel, Thumbelina realized something with perfect clarity. She had to escape, even if she did not yet know how. She knew she could not let the darkness claim her future. The choice before her was no longer about fear or gratitude. It was about her own spirit and the light she could not bear to lose. Her heart turned toward the surface once more, and she understood that she would leave the underground world behind as soon as she found the chance. Thumbelina returned to the underground chamber with the image of the fallen bird still resting heavily in her mind. Days passed quietly, each one filled with the same dim light and low rustling sounds of life deep beneath the soil. But now, everything felt different. The walls of the mouse's home no longer felt warm. They felt close and small, as if they were slowly closing in around her. Her heart carried the memory of the bird, and the need to escape grew stronger each day. She waited patiently for the right moment, knowing she needed both courage and opportunity. When the field mouse slept deeply after a long day of gathering food, Thumbelina slipped quietly through the tunnels, trying not to disturb the soft earth beneath her feet. She moved with care, guided by the faint drafts of air that signaled a path toward the surface. The tunnels twisted and turned, but Thumbelina followed the cool breeze that drifted from above. Soon she reached the familiar narrow opening that led up toward the world she missed so dearly. The cold air of early morning rushed toward her the moment she climbed out of the tunnel. It bit at her skin, but the sharpness felt refreshing, like a reminder that the world above was still alive. Thumbelina stepped onto the ground, her body trembling from both cold and fear. But she did not turn back. The open world, with all its danger, felt like a place she belonged to, far more than the dim underground chambers. The forest around her was quiet, wrapped in the stillness of early winter. Frost clung to fallen leaves and covered the grass in a pale layer of white. Thumbelina wrapped her arms around herself, trying not to shiver too much. She knew she needed warmth. As she searched for shelter, she heard a soft sound nearby, a faint, struggling flutter. She followed it carefully until she found the very bird she had seen in the mole's tunnel, now lying on the forest floor. Its wings barely moved. Thumbelina approached gently, feeling a deep sorrow for the creature. She reached out, touching its cold feathers, and realized that although the bird was terribly weak, it was still alive. The winter air had stolen its strength, but its heart still fought. Thumbelina felt a surge of determination. She could not leave it here to freeze. Gathering fallen leaves and small bits of dry grass, she created a soft layer around the bird's body. Her hands shook from the cold, but she kept working, pushing warmth toward the fragile creature. She stayed with it through the long morning, sharing what little heat her small body could offer. Slowly, the bird's breathing grew stronger, its body warming beneath the nest she built. When sunlight finally broke through the trees, the bird opened its eyes. Thumbelina stepped back, watching with hope as life returned to it. The bird lifted its head weakly, feeling the morning sun on its feathers. Thumbelina felt joy fill her chest. She had escaped the darkness, and now she had helped something else return to the world of light. As the day warmed further, the bird at last found the strength to spread its wings. Thumbelina watched as it shook off the frost that clung to its feathers. Then, with a slow but steady motion, it lifted itself from the ground. Its wings beat the cold air, and it circled above her before landing gently at her feet. It lowered its body, as if offering Thumbelina a place to climb. She hesitated at first, uncertain if she should trust herself in the open sky. But when she thought of the underground and the future she had been expected to accept, she climbed onto the bird's back without fear. The bird rose into the air, lifting Thumbelina with it. The world below shrank quickly, opening into a wide landscape of frosted trees, frozen streams, and hills dusted with white. The wind rushed past her face, cool but clean. Thumbelina held tightly to the bird's feathers, feeling the strength of its wings carry them higher and farther. The forest became a patchwork of colors below, and soon they flew beyond it entirely. Thumbelina had never imagined the world could stretch so far. Everything she had known, her home, the garden, the pond, the underground chambers, seemed so small compared to the endless land spreading beneath her. The bird carried her out of the cold region, flying toward the faint warmth of the south. As they traveled, Thumbelina watched landscapes change beneath them. Snow-covered fields gave way to patches of green. Frozen lakes transformed into shimmering water that reflected the sky. Bare trees became forests, rich with leaves and color. Birds flew beside them in groups, their wings beating in patterns that filled Thumbelina with awe. Days passed as they traveled, each one warmer and brighter than the last. Thumbelina rested against the bird's soft feathers, feeling a calm she had not felt since she lived in the woman's home. The world no longer seemed frightening. It was grand and beautiful, filled with places she had never known existed. The deeper they traveled into warm lands, the more Thumbelina's heart expanded with quiet hope. Perhaps somewhere in this great world, a place waited for someone like her. The bird carried her over fields of tall grass that waved like oceans. It carried her across valleys where rivers wound like silver paths. It flew high above mountains whose peaks glowed in the sun. Everywhere she looked, the world shone with possibilities. Thumbelina began to understand that her journey had not been only about escaping danger. It had also been leading her toward something new, something she had not yet found. One morning, after many days of travel, the air around them grew soft and warm, filled with the scent of flowers. The bird flew lower, circling slowly. Thumbelina looked down and saw a valley filled with blooms of every color: golden, pink, white, and deep violet. The flowers opened wide toward the sun, and between their petals moved small, graceful figures with wings like delicate glass. Thumbelina leaned forward, her eyes widening. These figures were no larger than she was. They moved lightly, floating and gliding between the blossoms. Their wings shimmered as they brushed against petals and leaves. It was a world made for tiny beings, untouched by the harshness she had known in other places. The bird descended gently, landing beside a cluster of tall flowers whose scent filled the warm air. Thumbelina stepped off its back, her feet sinking softly into the ground. The sun touched her skin with gentle heat, and the breeze felt warm and welcoming. She looked around, taking in the strange but beautiful sight of creatures who seemed to live in harmony with the flowers and the bright sky above. As Thumbelina stood among them, a tiny girl in a land shaped for tiny people, she felt something settle deep within her. It was not the relief she had felt when she escaped the underground, nor the peace she experienced while flying through the sky. It was something steadier, something that felt like recognition. She had traveled far. She had faced cold winds, deep tunnels, wide waters, and endless skies. And now she stood in a place that felt both new and familiar, as if the world had finally opened to reveal where she truly belonged. Before her stretched a land filled with beings her size, moving among flowers that rose above her like bright, gentle towers. It was a place shaped by sunlight and soft breezes, a place where she did not feel strange or small. As she took her first steps into this new world, the warmth of the valley wrapped around her like an embrace, guiding her toward the life that was waiting for her there. Thumbelina entered the new land with a softness in her steps, as if she feared the ground beneath her might vanish. For so long, she had moved through places that did not seem meant for someone her size. The fields had been tall forests. The streams had been wide, restless roads. The underground tunnels had been a maze that pressed too tightly around her. But here, the world unfolded with a gentle balance. Flowers grew at a height that welcomed her rather than dwarfed her. Leaves curved like small roofs instead of towering shelters. Even the breeze felt shaped for wings as delicate as hers. It was as though the land had been drawn with her in mind, each line sketched in harmony with her scale, and with a kindness she had never known before. As she walked farther, she saw more signs that this was not simply a peaceful place, but a place intentionally crafted for beings like her. Smooth stones were arranged like pathways, their surfaces warmed by the sun. Small pools of clear water glimmered between them, shallow enough to cross without fear of sinking. The grass stood in trim, soft patches, not wild blades threatening to bend and trap her. Here, nothing seemed to lean too close or loom too high. Everything breathed with a calm rhythm, as if the land itself understood the needs of tiny creatures and provided for them. For the first time since she had left the safety of her flower petal cradle, Thumbelina felt her body relax. She noticed it slowly, as though the tension had become invisible over the long journey. Her shoulders had been tight, her breath cautious, her movements guarded. Now her steps lightened without her telling them to. Her heartbeat settled, no longer racing with the instinctive fear of what might be hiding around the corner or beneath a leaf. It was an unfamiliar feeling, this sense of ease, and she let it settle into her like sunlight. She continued walking until she reached a place where the land opened wider. It was a meadow, painted with colors she had never seen blend together in such harmony. Soft pinks melted into warm yellows, and gentle blues brightened the edges of the field. Tiny flowers swayed slowly, moving as if dancing to a song carried by the wind. As Thumbelina watched them, she understood that she had stepped into a world built for delicate beings who lived with the same fragility and grace that shaped her own life. She was no longer the smallest soul in a vast, indifferent world. She belonged here. As she wandered deeper into the meadow, she caught sight of small homes crafted from petals, shells, and woven stems. Their entrances were shaped with care, sized perfectly for someone her height. There were bridges stretching over streams that glowed with faint reflections of the sky, their arches decorated with tiny stones arranged in patterns that seemed to sparkle, even without direct sunlight. Thumbelina noticed signs of daily life, small items left on flat stones to dry, paths pressed into the ground by gentle footsteps, and intricate designs etched into the surfaces of leaves. She understood that others like her lived here, not hiding from the world, but flourishing within it. The thought filled her with a quiet wonder. She had spent so long moving through places where she never quite fit, too fragile in one place, too small in another, too lost everywhere. She thought back to drifting on the leaf across the wide water, exposed to the wind and the creatures that approached her out of curiosity or hunger. She remembered the underground world where she had felt both safe and trapped, protected, yet stifled. And she remembered traveling through the cold air, pushed forward by the hope of something warmer, something better. All these moments had shaped her, but none of them had allowed her to feel the simple comfort of belonging. As she continued exploring, she found herself near a large blossom that stood open like a shining cup. Its petals glowed softly in the daylight, and inside the flower lay a space that looked more inviting than any home she had ever seen. The petals curved in a way that resembled a cradle, and the center of the blossom shimmered with tiny drops of nectar that looked like beads of amber. Thumbelina stepped closer, drawn by an instinct deeper than curiosity. She touched one of the petals and felt a warmth that traveled gently through her hand. It reminded her of the flower she had been born from, the very first thing she ever knew, a memory so distant and yet so present in that moment. The sight made her pause. The world she had left behind had given her life, but not a permanent home. This new land, however, felt like a place she had been searching for all along without knowing it. It was not only the size of the world around her that mattered. It was the feeling that she could finally rest, without danger lurking at the edges. It was the sense that her steps were not an intrusion, that her existence did not disturb the balance of the world. She was part of the landscape here, not an outsider wandering through it. Thumbelina continued exploring the meadow, and with each new area she discovered, her certainty grew stronger. There were places to sleep, places to bathe, places to rest under the shade of petals, or to warm herself in the sun. There were signs that the tiny people who lived here treated nature with respect, building their homes and lives around its natural rhythm, rather than bending it to their needs. She saw harmony woven through everything, between the land and its inhabitants, between the sky and the ground, between the quiet moments and the gentle movement of the wind. As she observed all of this, she began to understand her own journey more clearly. The hardships she had faced were not simply obstacles to overcome. They had shaped her path toward this moment. The dangers she escaped, the loneliness she endured, and the small wonders she discovered along the way all led her to a deeper understanding of herself. She had not been searching for a place that merely kept her safe. She had been searching for a place where her heart could settle, where her size was not a trial, but a natural part of the world. Thumbelina stood in the center of the meadow, breathing in the warm air. It wrapped around her with a comfort she had never known. She felt the weight of her journey lift slowly, replaced by a calm certainty that she had reached the end. Not the end of her story, but the end of her wandering. She finally understood that home was not the place where her life began. It was the place where her heart could rest without fear, without being too large or too small for the world around her. In the land of tiny people, Thumbelina found the peace she had been quietly seeking since the moment she opened her eyes inside a flower. Her story had never been about fleeing from danger. Though she had faced many, it had been about moving toward the place where she truly belonged. A place shaped by gentleness, warmth, and harmony. And now, standing in the meadow that welcomed her without hesitation, she knew she had finally arrived.